All right. So how is trauma connected in the movie Turning Red? We're going to cover this topic today and a few others. My name is Dr. Ed, and I'm just a geek kid who was shown some mercy when he was caught cheating by his grade 7 French teacher. Let's go. So today, I'm going to cover a topic that is pretty interesting to me. And if you think about like the getting stuck in lockdown, what do you do with all this time? You spend a lot of time figuring out what your kids like, and if that becomes things like doing these turning red like freeze dances, which is what they're doing a lot in the school care. Then it's about learning about what's interesting to them. Now, I'll give you like my goal today is to give you a little bit of perspectives on the movie Turning Red, and for this, I have added some fun little stickers for it. So let's see, I can show you this one. Yes. And this one. Yes. So we've got a couple different activities, and then we'll also bring in a few other characters as we go, because I'm going to be talking about the impact from the parents' perspective, and also the impact from the kids, and of course different generations as well. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Ed. I grew up in the northeast hood of Calgary, next to Pine Ridge, and you don't have to be a Calgarian to know why this community was nicknamed Crime Ridge. It was creativity that got me out of my slump and led me to my doctorate in computer science and over 15 years in educational technology. I'm here to give back as a speaker and diverse decision making coach to innovative school districts and cutting edge organizations, and of course, change makers. So, we're seeing a lot more, a lot of changes, especially when it comes to speaking about mental health. And I really like that there's a couple different videos, one from Fangirl that talks about generational trauma. And there's another one from Therapist Reacts from Georgia Dow that talks about this as well. And I thought originally that this topic was just going to be about intergenerational trauma, but I think it's much more than that. And I'll explain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down a few things. So I'm going to cover this tree concept that was discussed, and I'm going to go a little bit further into intergenerational trauma, and then finally I'll talk about like how trauma is connected more broadly. And this will give you a sense of the way that I see things a little bit differently. And so, all right, here we go. I hope you are ready. Let's go. There we go. Okay, so there's going to be some interesting things that were covered. Last week there was a big apology from the Pope, and I think that there's some things in it that was pretty interesting for us that connects with Turning Red. And one of the things that he said, and maybe I can do that now. Um, so I want to say that when it comes to like to trauma, intergenerational trauma, it is not just a single generation, right? So we have the grandparents who start off, right? So we start off with the grandparents. So we'll call it like grandma, right? And then we have that going down to the parents, and then ultimately to the kids. So just talking about how trauma is intergenerational. So let me show you what I mean. So you've got like grandma who has a particular type of anxiety in this particular case. The one that she has, and it's all the same. It's interesting. Like all of them turn red. That's the anxiety. That is the shame in this case. Is they all turn into the panda, right? So every single one of those characters turns into the panda. That is really their shame, or the thing that they're always trying to get rid of. And I think that it's interesting because that same type of anxiety then moves on to the daughter, who then she spends her whole life kind of thinking, oh, well, what if I could be like, I could never be the perfect daughter. What can I do? Right? Like, I always wanted to be the perfect daughter, and I can't do it. And so that becomes her trauma that she then passes on to her daughter, which is this kind of notion of like, you've always got to be perfect. And this is something that I can speak from like my own personal experiences as well, is that this happens a lot, right? Like, we are, especially when we're young, what we are as children is mostly determined by what our parents like, their own perspectives on life. We just adopt theirs to begin with, and it takes a long time for us to discover ourselves, right? To discover, well, what is it that we stand for as a group of, like, as an individual, a unique individual. And sometimes it's not easy to break away from this expectation that we are what our parents expect us to be. And so I think that that's something to me that is very interesting about trauma, is that it doesn't just last for your lifetime. It actually is something that we pass on. But in the same way, so like an example for me would be, um, so for my dad, when he was younger, he was all over the place. Maybe he had undiagnosed ADHD like I did. And it was his brother sitting him down and saying, "Look, you're gonna learn. You're gonna learn these, like, you're gonna learn math. You're gonna learn all of these things. You're gonna work really hard, and we're going to get through this." That led him to be successful, which led him to repeat the same practice for me when I was growing up. And that's one of the ways that I was able to, like, after we decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to try to put a very serious effort towards school, that he was around and he was like, yeah, this is what happened for me. This is what I'm going to do for you. I know it works because it worked for me. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. And now, today, I, as a parent, like, from a parent's perspective, I'm doing the same thing for my own kid. Is I'm sitting him down and I'm going, look, I know that this is tough. I know that you don't want to be here and you don't want to do this, but this works. I've seen it work for my dad. I've seen it work for me. It'll work for you as well. Let's give it a try. And so this can be good, right? Things can be beneficial onto multiple generations. But things can be bad as well. We can transfer over the trauma that we experience onto the next generation as well. So if I was like, if, let's say, a grandparent grew up during the war, and during those times there was a lot of things to fear, right? Like, we didn't. There was a lot of uncertainty with respect to even food. There was a lot of uncertainty about safety, and so that fear very easily translates into the next generation, could be the grandparents. And that fear can then transfer onto the parents and then ultimately transfer over to the kids as well. And it can take the form of, oh, well, you're not feeding them well enough. Oh, they're cold all the time. The fear is that they'll starve to death, or the fear is that they'll get pneumonia. And I think that these types of things are all connected. They're all intergenerational. They're all connected. And I think that, to me, this is a really, really important point about trauma, is that it doesn't just affect you. It affects everyone. So here's how I want to expand that concept. I want to talk a little bit about Pope Francis and his apology for residential schools, because I think the stuff that he mentions at the beginning was very important. He spent, I want to say, a week or more just listening to what First Nations communities in Canada experienced when it came to the trauma. And I want to highlight some of that because I think that it's relevant to our discussion here about turning red. So if you'll bear with me.
It's funny.
Started. So really in this apology, the main thing I want you to get is this analogy of a tree and how they think intergenerationally. It's something that we can learn from the First Nations communities. So here we go.
Let me start by saying that it is part of your traditional wisdom. It is not only a turn of phrase, but also a view of living. In every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the seventh generation. These are wise words, far-sighted, and the exact opposite of what often happens in our day. When we run after practical and immediate goals without thinking of the future and generations yet to come. Instead, the ties that connect the elderly and the young are essential. They must be cherished and protected lest we lose our historical memory and very identity. They must be cherished and protected, for whenever memory and identity are cherished and protected, we become more human. In these days, a beautiful image kept coming up. You compared yourselves to the branches of a tree. Like those branches, you have spread in different directions. You have experienced various times and seasons, and you have been buffeted by powerful winds, yet you have remained solidly anchored to your roots, which you kept strong. In this way, you've continued to bear fruit, for the branches of a tree grow high only if its roots are deep.
There we go. So this is the message that I really wanted to get across today. Interesting. So the main message that I wanted to get across today was that this trauma, right? And they refer to it as a tree. The First Nations communities refer to it as a tree, and they refer to it as something that it's very interesting. This is showing this. Hold on a sec. Yeah, there we go. So they refer to it as a tree. And I think this tree analogy is really interesting. So let me bring that up. I'll just use orange. So essentially, they consider themselves to be kind of like branches of a tree, and that their tree, like essentially whatever happens at the root or at the base, this type of trauma leads in to other generations. And so they said that they're always looking into the seventh generation, right? So if they're always looking into the seventh generation, then they're looking out at a tree that has that impact, that level of impact into the seventh generation. And I think that that's something that is absolutely like a great way of describing it. And they describe like kind of these roots. And the roots have to be strong because in the instance of residential schools, they were pulled out of their roots and they were planted in another location. And so these roots really, like, they didn't have them. They lost a lot of their roots. And so any kind of like trauma, any poisoning that we have in one generation leads into the next. And I thought that that was a really interesting way of describing it, is that our trauma kind of is intergenerational, kind of like branches of a tree. And when we look at like all of the different aspects, so let's say that let's see if I can bring this up. The mom is trying to specifically, like, why is she hiding behind the tree? Why is she like trying to cover for her daughter all the time? It's this notion that she had to be perfect, when she was young, and now she expects that of her own child, that her own child needs to be perfect. And the kids, they experience that same trauma as well. So the kids now feel like, yeah, I've got to be like the best at math. I have to listen to what my parents say. My whole role in life is to make my parents happy, to meet their expectations. And so when it comes to something like being the panda, this is exactly what's going to cause problems, right? So this is exactly what's going, like, I don't want you to embrace this panda-ness. I want you to completely reject it. This is a shame, an annoyance, an inconvenience of our family. I don't want you to embrace it. But that's not what she chooses to do. She chooses to go, okay, you know what? I am going to embrace this. I'm going to choose for me what is the right path. And I'm going to choose a path that is totally different from what you have selected for me. And to me, this is how we stop it. This is how we stop that intergenerational trauma. So you can think of, like, even from my own perspective, like as a parent, there are some types of trauma that I'm going to say, I'm not going to pass that on. I'm going to make a conscious decision that I'm going to choose a different path. And that is where we can actually shut down. So if we think about that branches of the tree, we can nip it in the bud. We can prevent that from being an intergenerational trauma. We can just erase the whole branch. And we can say, we're going to write a new path. And this is one of the reasons why I found reconciliation to be so important. How can you even get towards the point of stopping that intergenerational trauma? Like, just because you don't experience it directly does not mean that it doesn't impact you, because it impacts your parents directly, right? Like, everything that happens directly impacts your mom and dad and the way that they treat you. And it's going to directly impact you as well. You know what? Like, I may not have experienced like the head tax, for example, in Canada, but we certainly know what it's like to be excluded. And we certainly experienced that from my own parents' perspective. I remember there was a story of like my dad commenting about this one time that he tried to get like advance in his own work. He tried to get like promoted. And people basically said to him, like, what's the problem? Like, just because he's Chinese, you're not going to promote him? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, somebody was actually calling that out. And I remember hearing that, and I remember like his career mostly staying in the same role for the good part of like 35 years. And I remember the impact that had on me, that I felt like I never felt that I would be able to advance in a large corporation. I always felt like the corporate ladder didn't exist. At least it didn't exist for me. And that changed my outlook. That changed my outlook on a lot of things in life. It kind of led me towards going from bigger companies to smaller and smaller companies, where there was more and more flexibility. There was more options for me within a smaller company. And it also led me ultimately to thinking about entrepreneurship and creativity, and thinking even of like making it out, like doing something independently on my own. And so that's something that I think we need to consider. It needs to be a part of our own practice. Cool. So I think that thinking of it like branches of a tree, thinking it like the roots that can grow, that can impact not only we think like dealing with our trauma is only for our own mental health, but don't think about it that way. Think of it as you when you're dealing with trauma, you're actually not just impacting yourself as a parent, or if you're a dad, but you're also talking about impacting your kids as well, and the next generation, future generations. So just something to keep in mind. Now, the way that you do that ultimately is by ultimately embracing a different path and a different reality. And this isn't easy because the people who like raised you, your family and your friends, they see things from a very different perspective. So it could be very difficult. Like if your parents have never done like this moving towards entrepreneurship or doing like YouTubing and all of these things that I'm talking about today, it's going to be hard for them to envision you doing that. And so you can imagine, of course, that's going to result in a lot of resistance. And we often say the first step for any type of transformation is that the first step is that people ignore you, right? The first step is they ignore you. The next is that they laugh at you, right? They're like, come on, this is ridiculous. They try to pretend like, hey, this isn't going to exist. Then they laugh at you. And then they get angry. They get angry that you're still doing it. Why are you still doing this? Why don't you go out and get a nice job, like a nice stable job, kind of like what I've had, right? Like kind of like my experience. You're just not listening to me. And then ultimately, they'll want to know how much you charge, right? They'll be your followers. They'll be your fans and they'll be your followers. It's funny how that works. Like nobody believes in you until you've already become a success. But before you could become a success, you had to believe in a different path for yourself. And that's not easy because you essentially had to, I would almost describe it as uproot yourself from where you are right now to a different place. And that's not easy. That's like starting over again. And that's like starting alone. And so it's so important for you to find community. And that's one of the other things I want to talk about in Turning Red. Because in the movie Turning Red, and maybe I'll just bring in some other facts, is that, hold on a sec.
Check out this verse.
Okay. So really, when it comes to the movie and the experience, you're really talking about not just a single individual, right? You're talking about, let me skip. You're talking about family, right? You're talking about friends, you're talking about community, and you're also talking about business as well. You can see like a person's life doesn't just affect them. And this is the historical aspect of the video where they talked about, wow, it was this like thing that was really helpful for their family, right? It was a good thing. And then later people just found it to be an annoyance. And so when she makes that discovery, it's not just her, but of course it's her friends and her family. And I think that to me, and maybe I'll just do a pause here. That's really what this is all about, is that when it comes to trauma, I thought it was just the intergenerational kind of the tree metaphor. But the reality is we now live in this hyper connected global internet, right? And so now people are expressing their trauma online. So trauma online is a totally different beast, because when you are online, really you're experiencing it with all of your friends and all of the people who know you. And that is another dimension to trauma, that trauma is now much, much more connected than ever before. I talk about AI. AI is this platform because AI amplifies anger, right? So the focus of like the emotional focus of a lot of AI systems is to get to increase watch time. And so as a result, what happens is you just see stuff that makes you angry because that keeps you watching for longer. It gets you engaging more, writing more comments. It gets you it gets you clicking like the like button or sharing that, like engagement. And so anger leads to more ads, more time watching ads. And I think that this is really the real pain point I have with society, is that trauma is no longer this private thing, especially for the younger generation, like kids who are very comfortable sharing everything online. Your trauma is now like an online spectacle, like this yeah, it's like a spectacle of a spectacle of trauma, which I feel is a sad thing if it's mostly focused on the negative, but it doesn't need to be. And I think that really we can think of it as a thing that can be very positive. But this trauma doesn't just apply to it doesn't just apply to your friends. Well, it can also apply to a place of workplaces as well. Workplace trauma. Because I remember times working for like a large company where they were letting employees go, and I remember the impact that that had on just employee morale. Like everybody was down all the time because we had this, like I describe it as like a type of collective trauma, right? Because you had this survivor's guilt. It's like, why were these people let go, terminate, and then why did I say? So you had this like survivor's guilt, and so we kind of all like lived with that for a period of time. I remember how difficult that was and how that impacted the culture. And it did feel like at the time, man, all of these decisions are being made and I have absolutely no control over what is happening in the company, in the workplace, right? It's just like decisions are being made. We have no idea what the rhyme or reason is for these decisions. They're just like people moving ahead. And so it creates this culture, and I would describe it as like a type of like a fear, like a culture of fear. And it doesn't just happen for families; it happens in companies as well. And so when people are afraid, they just stop. They stop sharing, right? They're just like, oh man, this is just a job. This is just something I have to do in order to feed my family. And it's a really terrible place to be, and it's some place that I've been before. And so you, as an employee, even in your own work experience, you have a choice. Do I stay, right? Do I stay in that situation and then become one of those branches of the tree and then pass it on to all of my own employees? Or do I say, you know what? I'm going to uproot myself, going to try a different job, try a different career. Sometimes you have to pick the right thing that is the right thing for you. And sometimes you have to choose a different path. And I think that that notion of the mindset, the collective trauma that people experience at work is really, really important. More important than company perks, more important than even compensation and salary. This affects everything. Nobody goes home from work and then has a great day at home. In the same way, nobody has a bad day at home and then has a wonderful day at work. These two are very closely connected. And so you need to have that, you need to have the right kind of mindset, the right kind of people around you in both environments in order for this to be like a successful and thriving environment. And so it's important. It's important to take trauma seriously because this, when it really gets out of hand, like you're going to see the entire productivity of your corporation just plummet. And you're going to see creativity, like you're not going to have creativity, right? Like creativity is literally going to stop. And that means that as a company, like your competitiveness, your unique sales propositions, you're not going to have them because other people, other companies are going to catch up to where you were, right? It takes a lot of optimism in order to be creative because creativity means that you're going to fail and you're going to fail a lot. And if you are afraid of failure, forget it, right? Like you will not be able to be creative. Like forget creativity, just like focus on production or focus on something else. Don't focus on like focus on commodity, right? Maybe use your creativity somewhere else. But that becomes a real trigger point. And so yeah, it is your friends, right? Your friends who are really important. So yeah. The other thing I want to add, and this is what I do. Like I ultimately I'm here to help like change leaders stand out in a globally competitive market. I was like first exposed to AI when I had a YouTube video of my research go viral in 2005. And it wasn't all positive. Like there were a lot of haters. There, like people went and said, like, "This is fake. It can't be real." Um, but the reality is that you just got to keep moving on. Just got to keep posting. Like, it's the same thing with like the tweets that I had. I'm like, I'm not gonna go and respond to every single like person who has something negative to say, every hater out there. I'm gonna have to continue. I'm gonna have to have a different message. And so it is from this attitude of like just constantly be out there that I've helped influencers make their yearly income monthly and helped companies scale their business multiple times through unique positioning and, of course, viral marketing. And we see these phenomenal results when influencers and companies bring diverse ideas to the decision making table. And that's really what I want to do here is I think that turning red is an opportunity to think about the diverse ideas at the decision making table. Like when we are focused on our trauma, we see things one way. Things must be a one way. And we totally shut down creativity. We totally shut down our potential as an organization, as a change maker, even as a parent and a family member. We shut down the creative possibilities for our own family. And so that's why I feel like we need to rewrite the rules of live streaming. We need to rewrite the rules of online presence. And so in my own experiences, and I've shared a few of these today, I've learned that yes, trauma can be intergenerational, but it doesn't have to be. You can choose to mark a very different path. You can choose that, you know what? That trauma stops here in this generation. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it means that I've made a choice. I made a choice that I'm not going to follow the path of like the path of my parents or my grandparents or like of my dad. I can choose a different path, and I think that that's really important, that we have that ability to choose, and we have to choose. The reality is, if we don't choose, somebody is going to choose for us. It could be our workplace, it could be our friends. Like, this choice is being made for us all the time. Parents, friends, either you choose your path or someone else chooses it for you. And as much as possible, I feel we have an opportunity to look at how can we enable that choice. And one of the ways that we do it is just by not passing on that trauma onto the next generation. We choose to move in a totally different way. And so that is my time, and that's my perspective for today. Yeah, I'm Dr. Ed. I'm just a geek kid who was shown a little bit of favor for cheating on his French tests. And during that parent-teacher interview, my French teacher said, "You know what? I know Ed's struggling, but he's creative, so it's okay. I'm going to give him some chances to show that creativity in school." And it was the most important thing that I learned in life, that there are no boring tasks, just boring imaginations. Creativity doesn't just apply to our interests, it applies to every single thing that we do. I've made mistakes, and I've spent so many hours alone rewriting my own work. But it was creativity that pulled me through the darkest moments when I felt all hope was lost. Yeah, I was never the same after my French teacher helped me rediscover creativity. I realized that creativity is kind of a form of self expression. And that's why it motivates us so much, not just in school, but also it's this massive key to success in business. As oops, the global workplace becomes more competitive, you'll need a unique reason why customers will choose to work with you. And so the moral of this story of Turning Red, from my perspective, is that every unicorn discovered its uniqueness through creativity. So I have a massive passion for those who want to change their world. See, I come to empower influencers and businesses by treating technology as another creative tool. But of course, there's this gap between the change that we need and the public awareness that we need to get there. See, when you put meaningfulness over money, transformation over transaction, and conscientiousness over collection, it's not about you anymore. And it transforms how you speak to your family. It transforms how you do business. I'm not sure why you're here, but if you walk with me, I believe that the path will become clear. You'll begin to see greater opportunities than you can imagine today. Because technology doesn't have to be this tool that amplifies hate and sedates the masses. We use it to relate to the pains and the traumas of others like us. And we use it to work together to blaze a new path forward and to create this new path forward. I think we can make a huge difference on the world. My name is Dr. Ed, and I'm here to empower a new generation of change makers. If you found what I shared today helpful, please just throw a lightning bolt into the chat. Throw a lightning bolt into the chat. Because I'm here to empower and energize a new generation of change makers. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.